4.5 million years ago, somewhere on the open grasslands of eastern Africa, a mother woke in the night and pulled her infant closer. Not because she heard something, because she always did. Because in the world she lived in, the distance between alive and gone could be measured in seconds, and something ancient in her brain already knew that. She didn't have fire. She didn't have walls. She didn't have anything we would recognize as shelter. What she had was her body, her group, and every instinct evolution had spent millions of years building into her. And somehow, against predators that outweighed her, outran her, and could see perfectly in the dark, she kept her children alive. That story is one of the most important things that ever happened, and almost nobody talks about it. To understand what early hominins were up against, you have to understand the world they lived in. Australopithecus afarensis, one of our best documented ancestors from around 3.5 to 4.7 million years ago, stood roughly 3 feet tall and weighed between 60 and 100 pounds. They had no stone tools, no fire, no significant natural weaponry. What they shared the landscape with was something out of a nightmare. The predators of the Pliocene were not the scaled-down versions we see in wildlife documentaries today. There were hyenas the size of bears, saber-toothed cats with canines longer than your hand, giant eagles capable of carrying off a small child. Researchers estimate that somewhere between 6 and 10% of early hominins were killed and eaten by predators, and the evidence isn't theoretical. It's written in the fossils themselves. The Taung child is probably the most haunting example we have. Discovered in South Africa in 1924, this was the skull of a 3-year-old Australopithecus africanus child, found alongside the crushed and mangled remains of dozens of other small animals. For decades, scientists argued about what killed it. But the marks on the skull told the story clearly once researchers knew what to look for. Talon punctures. The same pattern left by a large bird of prey snatching something off the ground and carrying it into the sky. This child was picked up, carried off, and eaten by an eagle. 3 years old. This is what early hominin mothers were defending against, not occasionally but every single day, in every single environment they moved through. So what did they actually do? The first and most important thing was contact. Constant, unbroken physical contact. There were no cradles, no safe places to set an infant down while you gathered food or moved to higher ground. If you put your child down, your child could die. So you didn't put your child down. Mothers carried infants continuously, and the fossil record supports this. The Dakika child, a 3.32 million-year-old Australopithecus afarensis toddler found in Ethiopia, had a foot structure that reveals something remarkable. Her toes were still partially grasping, more like a chimpanzee's than an adult human's, built to wrap around a mother's body and hold on. The child was already walking bipedally on the ground, but her feet still remembered the trees, still remembered how to grip. That wasn't an accident. That was survival. Because when the sun went down, the trees were everything. Without fire, without any way to hold predators back, the only safe place at night was off the ground entirely. Adult Australopithecus were increasingly committed to bipedalism, but the children, with their grasping feet and their lighter bodies, could still climb. Researchers believe juveniles spent significantly more time in trees than adults, retreating upward when threats appeared, clinging to branches and to their mothers through the dark hours. A sleeping group on the ground, without fire to keep predators at bay, was a group that might not see morning. So they climbed. And the mothers climbed with them, infants pressed against their bodies, holding on. But no individual, no matter how strong or how vigilant, could protect a child alone in that environment. The real defense wasn't physical, it was social. Early hominins lived and traveled in groups, and within those groups, childcare wasn't just a mother's responsibility. Anthropologists call this cooperative breeding, the idea that infants were raised not by a single pair of parents, but by an extended network of caregivers, grandmothers, older siblings, aunts, and even unrelated adults who all took part in watching, carrying, and protecting the young. More eyes meant more warning. More adults meant more bodies between a predator and a child. The group itself was the defense system. The grandmother hypothesis takes this further. Researchers have argued that post-reproductive females, grandmothers, played a specific and critical role in early hominin survival, freeing mothers to forage more effectively while maintaining vigilance over grandchildren. This isn't a soft theory. It's supported by comparative data across primates, and it helps explain something unusual about humans: why we live so long past reproductive age in the first place. The long postmenopausal lifespan of human females is essentially without parallel in the primate world. And the most compelling explanation is that grandmothers were so valuable to infant survival that evolution selected for their longevity. The protection of young shaped the biology of the entire species. At night, the logic of closeness became even more urgent. A sleeping infant left even a foot away from a protective adult was an infant that could be taken. Leopards, hyenas, and other nocturnal hunters would move silently into a resting group and take whatever was least defended. The answer wasn't just sleeping near each other. It was sleeping in contact, bodies pressed together, infants tucked against adults so that any movement, any disturbance, any approaching threat would wake multiple caregivers simultaneously. This wasn't comfort. It was architecture. The sleeping arrangements of early hominins were a defense system built from bodies. There's something else the fossil and archaeological record hints at, which is the use of terrain itself as protection. Gorges, cliff faces, rocky overhangs, dense thickets. These weren't just places to shelter from rain. They were positions that limited the angles from which a predator could approach. A group sleeping with a cliff wall behind them couldn't be circled. A narrow, rocky defile meant a hyena couldn't rush the group from multiple directions at once. Early hominins weren't passive in the landscape. They were reading it, choosing positions, using geography the way a later species would use walls. Bipedalism helped here too. Standing upright meant they could spot threats at greater distances across open ground, and it freed the hands to grab, push, throw, or carry a child while running. What's striking about all of it is how layered it was. No single strategy was enough. Not the constant carrying, not the group vigilance, not the arboreal retreat, not the strategic sleeping positions. All of them together, running simultaneously, gave a child something close to a reasonable chance. And even then, the predation rates tell us it wasn't always enough. 6 to 10% of your ancestors died in the mouths of predators. The Taung child died in the talons of an eagle before it ever reached its 4th birthday. The world these mothers and families were operating in was one where every night brought real and immediate danger, where a moment of inattention had consequences that couldn't be undone. The fact that any of them survived, that their descendants eventually learned to control fire and push the predators back and turn the night into something navigable, begins here with a mother pulling her infant closer in the dark, with a grandmother scanning the tree line, with a group pressed together on a rocky ledge above the reach of the things that hunted them.